This is Blake Temez with the Blake Temez podcast, where I speak as a Catholic layman to Catholic laymen about missional living, wisdom cultivation, and legacy building in service of Christ and his bride, the Church. Thanks for being here. Occasionally, I want to use the podcast as a way to put a broadcast out there to see if anyone working or thinking in similar circles as I have thoughts or experience in realms that are outside of my area of expertise, and yet I'm trying to grasp for connections to ministry because some of the relevance seems like just at hand, but I can't figure out how to bring it into either the Christian context or the ministry context in particular. And one of these areas is covered in a recent episode of the Coaches Rising podcast, in which a doctor of psychology named John Churchill, yes, that's his name, was interviewed about these different aspects of awakening in the development of one's consciousness. And one of the reasons that I'm grasping or feel like I'm grasping to make these applications to the Christian context is because the manner in which John Churchill speaks about consciousness and related matters, I've heard very little discussion in Christian circles using similar terminology. And this makes sense to some extent because Churchill is coming from his background as a doctor of psychology, but also as a teacher of Buddhist practices. It says a teacher of Buddha Dharma, as well as a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine. And so, in many ways, his worldview, his terminology is worlds apart from mainstream Christianity and the Catholic Church in particular. And yet, when I hear him speak about these different processes of individuation and identification and initiation, which he describes in greater detail in the episode I was listening to, there seems something really useful for the Christian context. I think that one of the things that I need to think through further, and that I would benefit from having conversation partners to speak with about this, is a distinction between techniques and authentic experiences of prayer as a gift, as something not achieved through effort, and how that distinction is present within Christian spirituality in a way that it doesn't seem to be present in, let's just say, Eastern practices in general. Because there seems to be, in what I've listened to from those outside of Christianity speaking about meditation and development of consciousness, there's a big emphasis on techniques and devoting oneself to certain disciplines, and then having those disciplines take a gradual effect in one's psychology, but also in one's physiology, and that being a different way of talking about meditation and contemplation than is typically spoken of when Christians talk about prayer. There's dimensions of grace, there's dimensions of it being this divine gift that is given by God. And there's a point of connection insofar as in the Christian tradition there are plenty of, and I mean, call it mainstream. That's not my favorite term for this context, but in mainstream Christianity, there are practices of natural asceticism, right? Fasting, vigils, and um, bodily mortifications of various kinds, and things in that realm, solitude, that are accepted as appropriate forms of natural preparation for the spiritual activity or spiritual experience of prayer. Not that those activities and disciplines are prayer itself, but that they're preparatory so that there are less impediments to the action of grace in one's life. And so I acknowledge, and one thing that I want to be free to acknowledge, feel free to acknowledge whenever speaking in this realm, speaking to you as an audience, and as conversation partners, of a present lack of clarity and knowledge in now both of these realms, in the depths of the Christian tradition on the one hand, and then these areas of Eastern spirituality and cognitive science on the other hand. And so there's this difficulty in making these connections because of this lack of knowledge on my part at present. And so needing greater breadth and depth to my understanding in these areas in order to be able to bridge them in a way that is satisfactory to me when it comes to fidelity to the gospel, to revealed truths about Jesus and human anthropology and all of the things that go along with that. And so to make the connection more clear to these topics and our work as ministers, missionaries, and mentors, the practices described by John Churchill are described as transformative practices that deepen one's capacity for relationality and strategic activity in the world. And when it comes to developing Christian disciples, I see a point of connection there in wanting disciples to have, to be deeply relational and to have deep relational capacities when it comes to emotional attunement to themselves as well as to other people, and a healthy sense of self that enables one to make a gift of themselves. And then on the side of strategic thinking, there being complex realities in the modern era, I suppose now the postmodern, maybe even the meta-modern era, and it being essential for the church to have a greater number of disciples who are cognitively capable of interpreting complex circumstances and making wise decisions in the face of them. And so, insofar as John Churchill and his colleagues are achieving progress in those areas, that's something that I would want to take the best of and bring into the church, adapting those things to Catholicism, and strengthening the resources of the church. So, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is a bit more of like a broadcast, sending that out there for anyone listening who knows more in this realm of coaching, of consciousness development, of process work, various other things that were spoken about. And if you don't know anything, I encourage you to check out that interview with John Churchill on the Coaches Rising podcast. It's episode 182. give it a listen. Let me know what you think. There's a number of things that might raise um, like internal objections on the part of Christian listeners, and for good reason. I mean, he brings up, uh, he has a negative disposition towards Christianity and brings up organizations like Freemasonry in a positive light on a number of instances. And so, just as a warning, I don't expect every point to be agreeable to Christian listeners as they're not agreeable to me. But if you can suspend that, um, those evaluations and find the the wheat among the chaff, let's put it that way, um, then there's something to learn. And if you take the time to learn, I would love if you reached out and let me know what you thought. So I will end it there. As always, thank you for your time and your attention, and God bless you and all of your efforts. Peace. If you're a young Catholic man or a mentor, missionary, or minister who works with them, or even just a concerned figure in their life, a parent, uncle, whoever it might be on the lookout for the release of a short guide that I'm putting together called Brothers by Blood: How to Forge a New Path for Catholic Manhood. In it, I'll expand on some of the topics in this podcast and give you some points of reflection to see about how you can be a part of a movement that empowers men and brings them to their full potential for their sake and also for the benefit of the church and, by extension, the benefit of all society. So, again, thank you for being a part of this, and look out for more information about the release of my guide in episodes to come.